How would you feel if I shared a secret with you?
Come on, let's go.
A secret that answers the question, how do you stop the anger,
Each person next to the other.
the hate,
Families stick together and everyone will be taken accordingly.
and the cycle they all fall into? Let's take a little journey into the NIKKEI Way. You're probably wondering who this voice is that's speaking to you. You'll be hearing me throughout this film, so let me introduce myself. I'm Kainen. I'm a Japanese-Canadian Métis-born Gosei, or fifth-generation Japanese Nikkei. My Japanese mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother raised me. They taught me the meaning of being Nikkei. Now, I should probably tell you what Nikkei is. If you're a person with Japanese ancestry, you're called a Nikkei. Actually, most Japanese Canadians are generally referred to as Nikkei. For the purpose of this film, I'm going to divide the Nikkei into two groups. First, let's take a trip across the mountains to the sea to talk about the coastal Nikkei. Coastal Nikkei were the Japanese nationals, Nikkei, and naturalized citizens from Japan who lived on the coast in British Columbia. Manzo Nagano was the first man who started the whole influx of Japanese Canadians. He came to Vancouver from Japan all the way back in 1877. This move started something you don't see anymore in Canada, Japantown. If you take a look at Canada today, we have Little Indias and Chinatowns, but no Japantowns. And this happens because of what comes next. World War II. Canada was a part of the Commonwealth, a series of nations loyal to Great Britain at the time of the war. These nations and others were already going head-to-head with Germany and their allies. Even Japanese Canadian soldiers were fighting for Canada in Europe. Now, if we fast forward a bit, we come to the attack by Japan. Japan entered the World War in two ways. They attacked both America and the British Empire at the same time. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, and then decided to take control of British Hong Kong. World War II escalated to new heights, and things were going to change very quickly for every Japanese person of descent around the world. To start off, we need to define Japanese descent at the time. All second and third generation Japanese were Canadian-born citizens, and many first generation were naturalized citizens of Canada. Next is the War Measures Act. The moment this act is put in place, every right you have as a Canadian is taken away. Basically, with no rights. It's easier for the government to make citizens do as they wish. Thus began the forced dispersal of Japanese Canadians. Internment camps are well known throughout history. At the beginning of the dispersal, however, internment camps were actually not considered for Japanese Canadians. Instead, Japanese Canadian men were to be sent to work camps and separated from their families, who would be grouped together in places such as Hastings Park in Vancouver, also known as an assembly center. But then, the coastal Nikkei took a stand. They held protests asking for families to stay together and be treated the same as Japanese Americans. If the government complied, all coastal Nikkei would be classified as enemy aliens like Japanese Americans. They would be sent to internment camps and be able to stay together as families. The government of Canada actually complied. But there was something hidden up their sleeve. The Canadian government said all the possessions of the coastal Nikkei would be waiting for them. But in truth, the government planned to sell their possessions and make the internment camps the Japanese Canadians wanted. Ultimately, the Nikkei would unknowingly pay for their own internment.
Now, the choices for the Nikkei in World War II were as follows: starve in a prisoner of war camp, an internment camp, the work camps, or be bussed off to sugar beet farms. But what about the ones fighting across the sea in Germany for the country they loved?
Not knowing what was happening back home. The Nikkei taking the walls of Berlin. The Nikkei fighting in the first war to use weapons of mass destruction. Those weapons? The atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But what about the life of a single little girl? Thousands of miles away. This is where Lil comes in.
My name is Liliu Oishi, and I am 90 years old, and I have 4 children. I was born in Newton, BC. It's about 7 miles south of Newsminster. In BC, I had a very carefree childhood. And I was just thinking about it a few days ago, and I thought, gee, we were always smiling because Dad and Mom were around, and everything we did was joyful. When they were told that we were going to be evacuated, I thought, oh boy, we get a three-day bus ride from Newton to Alberta. But little did I realize what was ahead of us. We rode on a bus that was really squished, and then we ate the lunch that we brought with us. And what a sad feeling, because we didn't know where each of the families that we came with on the train were being dispersed. And then we thought it was miles of no man's land, because it was just a wide open prairie. And BC, there's trees all over, and I thought, gee, this is a strange place. Dad was the one that shogunai can't be helped, I guess it's a word for in English. So whatever they gave to him, he had made the best of the situation. Dad put newspaper on the walls and then covered the holes on the walls so that it would protect us from the wind. Now for drinking water, we had to drink the same water as the animals drank. So it was about a block away from our house. We had to haul the water by pail. We never realized how cold it was going to be, but Alberta was a very cold place.
What happens when you have nothing to go back to? When the country you came to have a new life has sold everything you worked so hard for and took your freedom. All you can do is move forward and look to a new beginning. So welcome to that new beginning. Welcome to the prairie. The plains of Alberta have their own little special story when it comes to the Nikkei. It all started back in the early 1900s when my great-great-granddad Koyata came out here with the first 100 Japanese men and their families. They were called out to southern Alberta for work. They were all Japanese from Japan and were Japanese nationals, as Nikkei didn't exist at the time. But, like all the others, Grandpa Koyata had to start somewhere. He built a farm near Raymond, Alberta, with a 2-bedroom house for a wife and 9 kids. One of those 9 kids was my great-grandma Tanaka, the woman who raised me. She would always tell me how grateful she was for everything, even if she never had much money and worked from before dawn until after dusk. She told me how the work made her strong. Even in her 90s, she gave it all to working on the farm.
To be fair, I've witnessed this in every Japanese woman I've met. This sense of gratefulness for everything they had, despite any hardship. The sense of gambatte. If something doesn't work, you try another way. That reminds me of someone, by the way. Pat!
Hello, my name is Pat Sassa, and this is Hardyville. Please imagine it, that was all prairie. As you see, there's many large buildings and trees and shrubs all about. But if we can please, let us take you back in time. With the War Measures Act, of course, those that did live in the city or those that were relocated from the coast were not allowed to live inside the city limits. Hardyville developed because of the number 6 coal mine. It was opened by the Alberta Railway and Irrigation Company approximately 1908 to 1909. The Hardyville was named after the superintendent of the mines, and his name was Mr. Livingston Hardy, and he later became the mayor of Lethbridge as well. The school was built in 1911, and it was just outside of Hardyville, about a half a mile. There was no means of school buses or any such. Our parents or the head of the household were working, and there was no question of how to get there. We walked everywhere. This is the location where I was raised from 1938 to 1956. It has now become a double lot with 2 new homes that are built on it, and obviously the hamlet of Hardyville has grown to become part of the city of Lethbridge. A little larger than some other homes there, 2 bedrooms. There was a living room and a kitchen and a back porch. We were fortunate in that my father was a coal miner, and so we were able to burn coal, large chunks of coal that often burnt through the night. I do vaguely remember going to the 5 and dime store with my parents on a weekend. It was a novelty because the ice cream sandwiches came to being. And I do remember my father going up to buy me a sandwich, and he was refused. And I don't know why. I don't recall that I cried or that I was overly upset. I never questioned it, actually. And there was no scene made. My father just walked away. And I do believe that. I mean, their understanding of integrating into the community and being quiet and not, raising any commotion. Well, my mother was a stay-home mom, of course, and she was the homemaker. She sewed all my clothes. We adopted my sister when I was 11, so there was 11 years difference. We had the minimal amount of toys given to us. We all had a doll. My father is a World War I veteran. He did not talk about his experiences at all, but I do know that he was very quiet. He did a lot of meditating or perhaps just recollecting perhaps his experiences in the war, because he sat in his rocker and would be quiet like for a full day. And he would bring 2 ice cream cones in his tin lunch bucket. And there was a good mile or more for him to walk from the Miners' Library to home. But that ice cream was intact, believe it or not. It was not melted down. So I'm assuming that he really sprinted or walked very quickly. But a super treat, of course, in those days.
What can we say about the Windy City, also known as Lethbridge, Alberta? This place was originally a mining town. It was officially incorporated in 1906 and had a population of 2,500 people. With the increased use of automobiles and the economic growth, the city expanded in every direction. In 1947, the Japanese Canadians were finally allowed back into the city of Lethbridge. However, due to post-war discrimination, Japanese Canadians made their homes in the outlying towns surrounding Lethbridge. But everything calms down eventually. Nikkei started to integrate into all areas of work, prospered in business and farming, and succeeded in education.
There was a special little place my grandma would take me as a kid, watching while she tended flowers, did her various Japanese art forms. That special place, the NIKKEI Japanese Gardens.
NIKKEI is special in many ways. It connects to every aspect of the Japanese Nikkei community of southern Alberta. A Jodo Shinshu Buddhist minister named Reverend Yutetsu Kawamura founded the garden along with his wife, Yoneko, and the publisher of the Lethbridge Herald, Cleo Mowers. The gardens was established in 1967. To this day, it still functions as a symbol of friendship and harmony between Japan and Canada. As a kid, you grow up on all the stories that help make the garden what it is. And that's something more than simply a tourist attraction. It was where we had obon, or fun Japanese festivals, where older generations as kids had to get rocks from the river bottom to line the side of the streams throughout the garden, where, even today, the various Japanese cultural communities come and host different activities.
That reminds me, Lethbridge once had many societies within its own community. The Nikkei Culture Society of Lethbridge still prospers today with New Year's parties, scholarships, and Japanese language classes.
And where communities gather, so do their people and their stories. But it is the act of preserving an individual's life that immortalizes it. If one were to visit Lethbridge now, they would come across such things as the high-level bridge, the old downtown with a tiny Chinatown, and the University of Lethbridge. The University of Lethbridge is one of the crowning jewels of Alberta. Let me introduce a professor from this university, Dr. Carly Adams, and with her from the University of Plymouth in England, Dr. Darren Aoki. What can you tell us about this whole Nikkei Memory Capture project?
Sure, we'd be happy to. Kynan, this is a long-term research project to explore our community in Southern Alberta through the experiences of Japanese Canadians. The project really is unique because we're using a special way of doing history, which is called oral history. This is a way of collecting historical information by talking to people and asking them to share their memories and their stories of their past. We record these and learn about people's experiences, about difficult times, about moments of joy and accomplishment or friendship.
Why is this project so important?
So far, we've met over 100 people who have shared their stories with us. Many of these stories we would categorize as being at risk of disappearing. The oldest person we met is 100 years old, and the youngest was 18. Many people were born in Canada, and some were born in Japan. We've met women and men who have lived all their lives in Southern Alberta, and then some who also came to Southern Alberta later in their lives.
To date, we've worked with a really wonderful research team of students who have helped conduct interviews and analyze data. They've brought their insights and their creativity to help shape the Nikkei Memory Capture project in really exciting ways. I'd like to introduce one of them now. This is Elaine Toth.
Hi, my name is Elaine Toth, and I have been a student researcher with the Nikkei Memory Capture project since 2017. One of my roles in this project has been to interview couples in interracial marriages and to hear about the intimacies that animate their lives, not just with one another, but with their children, extended family members, and friends and colleagues. Coming from an interethnic background myself, I was eager to empathize with the dynamics that come with combining diverse cultural practices and traditions. However, while also a longtime Southern Albertan, as a Caucasian, I discovered that listening to couples' life experiences, many fueled by racially infused attitudes, to be a more difficult process than I could realize. As I reflect on those interviewed, I want to describe to you an image of the future, our future, as an ever-growing, culturally and racially diverse people living in Canada. The stories these couples share shed light on the importance of promoting self-expression, the importance of deep listening, the importance of acknowledgement, and the importance of sharing the past. Each couple conveys an optimistic attitude about their lives, and in their willingness to discuss personal experiences, offers insight into cultural understandings while showing how interracial relationships will affect generations to come.
My uncle once told me, hard times make the strangest bedfellows. Then he told me the story of the only people who welcomed the Prairie Nikkei.
If one were to visit Southern Alberta, they would come across a collection of towns, such as the town of Raymond. Raymond was founded by the LDS and the Prairie Nikkei. From this, an unlikely friendship was born between the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Jodo Shinshu Buddhists. And I know just the person to introduce you to.
My name is Eiichi Tanaka, born in Raymond, Alberta, the fifth kid of 6, of an older sister and 2 younger brothers and 2 younger sisters. Went to school in Raymond. That's where most of our roots are from. My grandpa Koyata was a pioneer that homesteaded south of Raymond, and that's where most of our memories were made. You can see a pile of dirt over there by the tree that Uncle Ted used to have to carry water from the bottom well there up that hill. He used to complain like hell. Buildings went from that tree back south. There was a couple of rows of, I guess, granary and shops on both sides of where that peg is. And then where that one little building is, we had a bunkhouse. And that's where all the boys stayed. One of the boys used to pick on the Japanese boys, and I remember my cousin used to have a fight with him every once in a while. And I couldn't figure that out either until a few years after I found out that he had lost a lot of his cousins, uncles in the war in Japan. And after that, I felt, well, he has a reason to be ticked off at us, and we kind of left it at that.
In southern Alberta, it all started with the Raymond Buddhist Church, which currently stands as a historic site. This was achieved by the Jodo Shinshu Buddhists. Jodo Shinshu is one of the major sects of Buddhist practice within Japanese culture. Visitors to the area can also attend the Japanese United Church of Lethbridge. The United Church served as a gathering place for the Christian intern Nikkei, and from these Nikkei came Pastor George Takashima, who not only served as pastor for the United Church, but also as a role model for Nikkei history preservation. The other temple that should be mentioned is the Buddhist Temple of Southern Alberta. This temple was the amalgamation of all the Buddhist temples in the region. These churches and temples served two purposes back in the day. They served as a place of religious kinship and as a gathering place for the Prairie Nikkei, much like it did for two people I know who found love through the temple. Meet the other half to my Uncle H.E., my Auntie Betty.
Well, I was born in Lethbridge, Alberta, in the old Gold Hospital. My grandparents had owned a fruit farm in Vancouver, and I think they all thought they were going to be able to go back after the war, but that never happened. Well, MINYO dancing is folk dancing. It's not the real formal Japanese dancing. It's more fun. But I think, you know, if you grew up loving Japanese music and attending some of these functions that were at their church in our early years, like shibais and odori, I think as you get older and you have more time, then, you know, you get into it for your enjoyment too. And I'm glad that, you know, that I've been able to join some of this dancing and that while we've got a teacher too. It's hard to find good Japanese dancing teachers. When we were growing up, we used to have what they called a YBA, the Young Buddhist Association, and we used to have monthly dances. And so we would take turns hosting these dances. And it was one of these dances that Lethbridge was hosting that I met H.E.
A friend of mine that introduced me, I asked who that girl was, and he told me, and that was history.
I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks after this one dance, I received a letter in the mail. And I used to say, well, why did you have to write a letter? Why didn't you just pick up the phone and call? And he said, well, we used to have party lines out on the farm. And he said, everybody could pick up the phone and listen to your conversation. So this is why he had decided to write. Anyways, he had written a letter asking me if I'd like to take in a show sometime. And so I wrote back and said, yes, I would like to go to a show sometime. And this started our dating, our courtship, I guess.
In the end, what did I learn from all these wonderful people growing up? That life is full of unknowns. And although it can get rough at times, you just need to stop and look around. Look at the people you're surrounded by who make the world a happy place. And remember to do one simple thing: smile and laugh with them. When you're finished watching this, ask yourself, who is someone who makes you happy? Then ask that person who makes them happy. See how joy can spread with just a simple question?
For me, that is the NIKKEI way. Because who knows? Maybe happiness transcends lifetimes.